listening to Second Wind with Joyce Buford, where women who are ready to expand their life adventure discover the tools to stop playing small and tap into the courage required to enjoy their second wind. Welcome.
Welcome to Second Wind. I am your host, Joyce Buford, and I am delighted that you're with us today. You know, Second Wind was created primarily for you. I wanted you to understand that in this transition, this opportunity you have to do a second wind in your life starts with you getting to know yourself. Now, it's also to help you get inspired about the great opportunity you have, but to dream big. I mean, outside the box big. I want you to reach for the stars. Now, to inform you, you know, I have awesome guests. And this guest today is no exception. I mean, we are so pleased to have him on the show and to welcome him to the Second Wind experience. Now, you know that through their stories, through their knowledge that they're sharing with us today, it helps you make your journey easier. So I really want you to remember to connect and look for support as you start your journey. So let me tell you about our awesome guest. Norman Bacall grew up in suburbs in Montreal in a mixed Anglo-Franco community. He graduated from Bacall University in law in 1981 as a tax specialist. In 1989, he moved his family, including his wife and 4 children, which one was a wee little baby, to Toronto, Ontario, to open the Toronto office law firm. Now, his career took him to representing Donald Sutherland, specializing in film finance for 30 years, where he represented Canadian and American studios like Warner Brothers, MGM, and Sony. He sat on the Lionsgate board of directors for almost 10 years, while it evolved into a mini major studio. And you might remember the series of movies called Hunger Games. That was part of that family of the Lionsgate. So anyway, I welcome our guest today, Norm. Thank you for coming. We're thrilled to have you here.
Joyce, it's my pleasure, really. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I know there's a lot more in your history. You've done so much that I'm kind of let you kind of explain about the Canadian and the leading and the firm that you were with and growing that industry, the impact you had.
Sure. Well, you know, when I left McGill Law School in 1980 and started practicing in 1981, I pretty much knew nothing about anything, and spent the first 5 years of my career basically just training and learning. And I was very fortunate to represent people like Donald Sutherland, who, you know, and he was somebody who always treated me with way more respect than I ever deserved at the time, because I was still pretty wet behind the ears, and he was this famous actor already. And I promised myself, if I ever got to the point in my career where I could pay that forward to somebody younger and coming up the ranks, I would do it. And that was the kind of person I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I practiced law for a few years. I got into film finance. In some respects, it was by accident. In a lot of respects, it was because I was the guy at the bottom of the totem pole, and all the questions relating to our Canadian studio clients were ending up on my desk. So over time, I became the Canadian expert. And I'm like to say, not because I was smarter than anyone else, but just because it seemed like I was the only one in the country doing it. Because it just wasn't lucrative at the time. Yeah. And I got lucky. The Canadian industry was building. The US studios started taking an interest in Canada, and I grew along with the Canadian industry. Wow. And so part of it was positioning. In 1989, because of the politics in Montreal, the English-French divide, and the question of whether Quebec was going to separate from the rest of Canada, I walked into the office of the managing partner and said, I'm prepared to go to Toronto. We had talked about opening an office. And he smiled. I think he was thinking to himself, what does this guy know about opening an office? And he knew the answer because it was nothing. I didn't know anything about how to go about doing that. I knew how to practice law. And it was a great experiment. So I opened a storefront in 1989. We were 4 lawyers. As you pointed out, my wife deserves the medal for this because our baby was 10 days old when we moved, and she was the 4th. And it was 6 years and a day from in terms of age between the oldest and the youngest. So,
oh my!
So Sharon, who I write about, she's the hero of my first book, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
She went along for the ride, and she also, between her maternity leaves, was nursing her own career. And so we got to Toronto, and it was just one great, wonderful experiment. I was all of just turned 33, didn't know much about anything. And here I was having to build an office and recruit people who were way older and more mature than I was. And I still remember I'd walk into a room with someone in their 50s and say, if you want to cash in on my dream, here's your opportunity to practice law in a way you never imagined possible. And some of them knew I was bluffing, but others actually liked it, and it became the motto of the firm we were building. We were young, we were aggressive, we took chances, and I was learning all the way along. But most important, we were a place where I said the only thing I'll promise you is that you're going to have fun.
Yeah,
and that was our motto.
Well, that must have taken some courage, or were you just overly confident that you could go in and manage men or possibly women, but professionals older than you? I mean, did you feel always comfortable, or was there some?
Oh no, I was largely always uncomfortable, never knowing how. I had a dream of where I wanted us to be. Yes. It was never longer than 5 years out.
Yes.
But I didn't know for sure how we were going to get there. I didn't know I was going to be able to convince anybody.
Yes.
Over time, it's like anything else. It's, kind of like playing piano. If you take enough lessons, you are going to get better, even if you don't have a lot of talent.
Yeah.
And over time, I, developed it my way. But was I ever worried that I would fail? Yeah, of course, all the time. Was I always trying new things? Yes. And in fact, in about 8 years in, we were, the experiment was working, but the fellow who was running the entire firm discovered suddenly he had cancer. And as it turned out, it was terminal cancer. So I got a call one day saying, listen, I'm out of this job. I have to take care of myself now. Would you be interested in taking over for me? Mm-hmm. And I went home that night, and I said, I need to think about it. I talked about it with Sharon. Mm-hmm. And I said, I got no idea. Like, how do you run a law firm? And the one thing I knew for sure was that this was something I couldn't do. Like, I never wanted to do it.
Really?
Managing lawyers is something like trying to herd cats. They're very independent. They don't like to be told what to do. And the harder you push them to do it, the more they're not going to do it. So it requires all kinds of skills. And again, I had no idea if I could do it. But, my life motto was, if you're not sure you could do it, say yes. And then what's the worst that'll happen? You'll fail.
Right.
Which had become, in 8 years, I'd had practice with that mindset. Like, what's the worst that'll happen?
Yeah.
The office won't succeed, or my practice won't grow, or anything like that. So I took it on, and, from that point on, began to learn how to lead an organization.
Yeah.
And over the next, 16 years while I led it, we grew to an organization of about 1,100 employees all over Canada.
Wow, you did grow.
We did. Over that period, we employed 2 former Canadian prime ministers, including the father of our current prime minister, Trudeau, and a fellow by the name of Jean Chrétien, who I worked with on a number of files. And these, I've led in that respect, a very privileged life. I've, rubbed elbows. I met a couple of American presidents. at events, and and if I look back or project it back to 1981 when I started, could I ever imagine doing any of those things? The answer was no. Could I have imagined succeeding at those things? I would have laughed. I would have had a good laugh out loud.
Right.
So
that you'd ever be there.
That I'd ever be in that position and meeting those people, or for example, sitting on the board of a major U.S. studio and being presented with should we go ahead and produce the Hunger Games based on the book, and
Yes.
like having that discussion and all kinds of other things with business people. I couldn't even dream of meeting these people, much less sitting in a room and having discussions with them. So it was a journey.
I know. I envision that, in social gatherings, you and your wife, you had to just be kind of tickled a little bit, not in the beginning when you got to be in those special places with those special people. It's kind of like, I would like to think you kind of had to pinch yourself going, jeepers, how did I get here?
Oh, no kidding. And it was the strangest thing, because Sharon would entertain. We did once a year. We'd have all the partners into our house.
Oh, good, yes.
And but she retired from her accounting practice in the mid '90s to pursue her dream to become an artist.
Oh,
and while she was at school one day, she's walking down the street, and this is downtown Toronto, and this taxi drives by, and the taxi pulls over suddenly. And she hears a voice from the window rolls down, from a voice from the back of the taxi saying, "Sharon, is that you? This is Pierre." And she looks in, and it's the former Prime Minister of Canada. We stopped the taxi because he's recognized her. So that was like her life moment.
Yeah, that would be. Well, you were with this firm for 16 years and grew it to exceptional numbers. And so, but there was a transition period in it that you decided to retire, I assume. And during that, after that, your retirement, your dream, your baby that you had grown with such success had a difficult time and was failing.
Yeah, I led the firm for 16 years. I spent my entire adult life there, 35 years.
Right.
And because of our governance, my term as the leader of the firm was up, and and 12 months after the replacement was complete, the firm completely dissolved. It fell apart 14 months later.
Yeah.
And the last year was, it was a living nightmare. From beginning to end, with each week getting a little bit worse. And I don't know whether any of your listeners have ever been involved in a failing business or enterprise, but the stress involved in coming to work every day when you see things are going bad and you realize there's nothing, you feel powerless apart from anything else, because I wasn't leading it anymore, so I didn't have, and no one was coming to me for advice.
Right.
Probably had I been smart when I stepped down as leader, I would have left altogether. And the stresses involved in terms of that business collapse were enormous. And it got to the point where literally after 12 months out of leadership, I was urged to come back in, literally to try and save it. And ultimately that effort failed. And it was a run on the bank, a complete business collapse. And suddenly what I had spent 25 years building from 1989 to 2014 was gone. It was literally gone. And it was the greatest devastation of my life. It exceeded even losing my father in 1997. Somehow when your parent dies, it's an adjustment. But in some respects, he'd been sick for 5 years, so it was a slow adjustment. But this was sudden. It was shocking, and it was an indescribable loss. And I was a very frustrated and, to be honest, a very angry man.
Yeah. Well, I think my listeners out there can relate to this, because many times in their lives, a marriage ends, a husband dies, and you're faced with many of those same helpless feelings of frustration. What do I do now? What's my next step? Why couldn't I pull this back together? I mean, all those same questions we ask when we go through something as catastrophic as a life change. And that's what you experienced. And so I know in my moments of transition, which I refer to as um, defining moments for me, but they're like two roads coming together. And which one will I take now? Which way will I go? What will happen? The good time to question if you've got the wits about you to settle down, to be quiet together. And so I know probably you did a lot of that during that time. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is yes, though not by design.
Yeah,
I think, you know, part of, and this is what I learned, and I don't mean to compare this with, you know, with losing a special person in your life, or for example, a child, or going through an awful divorce. I can't imagine what that pain is like. I can only talk about my own.
right.
But I can tell you, for the first 12 months, every time I would run into people on the street, and I did have to go out and find another job. I knew it was temporary, but as my wife said, Norm, you know, go back to work, because you can't be sitting at home. So I did that immediately. I found a job with another law firm.
Oh, I was assuming you had retired, but you had
no. There was a 2-year interim period where I continued to work.
I see.
And that was just sort of I got to find the ground underneath me, but it didn't mitigate my anger. It also and for your listeners who ever lost someone, you know, part of the worst feeling is seeing the sympathy in other people's eyes when you walk into them. And it's like,
yes.
It's like, you know, I'm trying to move on with my life, and I could tell just by the way you're looking at me that you're trying to radiate empathy. I don't want it. I don't need it. And all this is doing is making me feel worse and more angry. Like, will I ever get out from under this? Was part of it. But you talked about defining moments a moment ago, and for me, it was about 4 months after the collapse, in the middle of July. My wife, I was home in the evening. My wife walked into the kitchen with one of those empty notebooks, and a pen. And she said, I think you need to start writing, because you need to process your anger. You need to process your grief. You haven't been doing it. And why don't you just write? She said, I'm not telling you what to write or how to write or anything else. Just start writing. And it took me a few days. And I finally sat down and I decided, you know, I'm going to write what the last day at the law firm was called Heen and Blakey. What the last day at Heen and Blakey felt like. I felt like I needed to be the captain going down with the ships. It was actually Valentine's Day night, 2014, if you can believe it.
Oh,
it was 6 o'clock. The sun was setting on Lake Ontario. It would otherwise have been a remarkable place to be. Yes. And I was sitting in this tomb-like structure, thousands of square feet with nobody in it, just, you know, recycling boxes and leftover garbage, nobody left. And it was a tomb. And I tapped back into how I felt at that moment. The desolation, nice. You know, the iciness of the lake and how it was kind of tied into my heart. And I wrote that scene. And at the end of that, I can't say I felt any better, but I had an idea of what I was going to do next. Because I got to the end of it and I said, okay, now what? Well, I certainly wasn't prepared to confront what I'd been through in the last year, like that epic loss. So instead I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to the beginning of my career and just write down every story I can remember.
I love it.
And just as an exercise.
Yes.
And that exercise turned into pretty much a 2 to 3 hour obsession every evening after work. All right. Get home at 9 o'clock. My kids are already grown up, and most of them had left the house already. Right. So 9 o'clock, I'd sit down with that notebook and a pen, and I'd start writing. And it got to the point where I couldn't. It turned into a 7-day-a-week habit. I couldn't stop. And finally that December, so I'd been writing for 6 months, I developed still didn't know how to type very well. So I did this all by hand. I filled up 6 notebooks worth of stories. I had a huge...
She wouldn't type, of course. You had a secretary.
Yeah, exactly, for all those years. So I developed a huge abscess on my writing finger.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew I was finished writing. And we went away on vacation for a few weeks. And when I came back, I got up my computer and I said, okay, now I'm going to type this all up. This became the first edit. I said, you know what, this would be a nice memoir for my children, because that's what it had turned into.
Yeah.
But it was 750 pages, about five or 600 typed. And I had a client and I got this idea. I said, well, maybe there's a book here. I don't know. What do I know about writing a book? The answer is absolutely nothing. But then I said to myself, but what did I know about leading a firm when I started, or opening an office when I started, or starting a film practice, or sitting on a film studio, where the answer was always nothing. So I sent it out to a client of mine who's a producer in Hollywood. And I sent just one chapter, and he sent back some script notes. Here's how you can improve the dramatic tension of the scene that you're writing about.
Yeah.
And then I sent it to an agent who happened to be a friend of mine, not with an intention of him taking me on. Yeah. And he said, Norm, he said, the story is actually interesting. He read only about 50 or 60 pages. He said, I think people will be interested in this story, but you have to understand one thing. At 750 pages, no one's that interested in your life. Said, call me back when you got it down to 300. And I spent the next 2 years
good advice,
reducing it to 300, and I got an editor involved, and she helped point me in the right direction. And the process of my becoming an author, again, I didn't realize that at the time, had begun. And the other thing I discovered that, once I had finished a very angry first draft and started typing it up, I didn't feel angry anymore.
Yes.
The anger had, translated to the pages.
Yes. You left it on the pages, right?
I absolutely. I left it on the pages of the first draft, and I left it, actually, it was on the pages of the 40th draft.
Yes.
This is how many times I had to go through it. And it was only when I handed it over to my libel lawyer, where he said, this paragraph's got to go because somebody could sue you. But I'm pointing fingers at people to blame them.
Yes.
So he said, these have to go. I said, but those are my favorite paragraphs. He said, all my authors tell me that.
Where I can really let out my anger.
But I found, even after removing them, that I wasn't angry anymore. It was, and I could reflect on the positive and what I'd learned, even through the collapse, and what I'd learned about myself, even in that last year. I could finally reflect on it and see what I had actually gained from it, not just what I'd lost from it.
Yes, that's a beautiful conclusion to it. Now, did you turn this into a book?
I did.
I know you've written, yes. Which book?
That book was called Breakdown, appropriately, although it's really 3 books in one. One is how you go from being a student to becoming a successful professional.
Yes.
The second book is my philosophies on how you build an organization, and not just a law firm, but any organization. What are the cultural values you need? How do you bond people? How do you keep people connected? How do you build something positive? And then the third book is a study from the inside on how easy it is for an organization to fall apart. So it was not only what happened, but reflecting on why it happened. And so that became a book. It was actually a Canadian bestseller back in 2017, and people are still buying it. Largely because it's an interesting book on organizational philosophy, and how you build things, and how important culture is to any organization.
Yes.
It's not just about how much money you can make. It's about what is it that holds people together? What is it that makes them feel valuable about coming to work every day? And the problems that most organizations face. So that was the first book. And then I followed that up with with something a little more practical, a book that I call Take Charge. And Take Charge was actually based on the reflections of 4 years after publishing Breakdown. I decided that part of my give back to the community that had been so wonderful to me and so kind to me and had given me so much and taught me so much I finally had the opportunity to give back. So I decided I'm going to give it to young professionals. And so part of my mentoring, I speak on university campuses. So I took 4 years of lecturing, and I also began to understand Breakdown better and what happened to me better. So I incorporated that into my second fiction, nonfiction. It's called Take Charge, and that's a book on the personal challenges we all have to face in order to succeed, and not just the first time, but the second time. And I think what makes it valuable to the people that I'm mentoring now, including people in your audience, is, I was a guy who had it all at one point, and then I lost it, and I had to start over. And I tell the people that I'm mentoring, I said, listen, I'm in the same position you are. I said, I've had to start over as an author and motivational speaker, and I didn't know how to do any of that when I started. And this is it's my continual life learning. So I'm not just lecturing to you, but I'm proving to you I can do it a second time. And if I can do it a second time, you can do it a first time.
Well, Norm, we call that second wind. You got your second wind.
No kidding.
Just a push on the word there. But I like Sharon. I want to meet Sharon.
She's the hero of Breakdown.
She is amazing. Yes, I like her wisdom, and probably her subtle way to bring in the notebook and the pencil. I think that's awesome. Now, in Take Charge. Oh, okay. The other question I want to ask you is, anytime we go through something as traumatic as the business failing and all that, there's some anger, as you expressed, but did you have to also deal with some forgiveness in that process?
The forgiveness, I think you have to focus on two levels, because forgiveness really isn't about forgiveness.
It's not.
True forgiveness is about letting go.
Okay.
It's not about the other person. It's about you. And I think the problem so many of us face is we're so locked into our anger and the things out of our control that have happened to us, and the things people have done to us or done to our business, like those evil people who destroyed my business, was how I looked at it at the beginning.
Right.
And at the end, the forgiveness is about letting go. It's about letting go of that anger. It's about recognizing you can't control everything in your life. Frankly, you can't control almost anything in your life. And there is only one thing you can control. And this is at the heart of Take Charge. The only thing you control is what's going on in your head. And if you can let it go, if you can let the anger go, if you can stop blaming everything else for everyone else for what happened to you, and just say, it happened to me, what am I going to do about it? If you can get to that point, and most important, and the part we don't really think about through all this, is if you can forgive yourself, because there's whether you're prepared to admit it or not, when bad things happen to us, there's a part of our brains that's secretly whispering in the back of our head, you did this. You're the author of your own misfortune.
Yeah.
And
we do contribute to it. We have a part, we have a role we play.
Yeah. But can you forgive yourself? That's the real question. And until you do, and it's funny because I took that and as I began to write, it was Sharon again who said, listen, you write pretty well. People like your book. Why don't you try writing fiction? So again, I don't know the first thing about writing fiction. And sure enough, when I handed what I thought was an acceptable draft to the editor who helped me on Breakdown, she very politely told me I didn't know the first thing about writing fiction. She said, all your characters sound like you, Norm. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and she gave me Fiction for Dummies. That's where I started on it, and right back to the beginning.
So that was a book.
That was.
Did you ever take any courses?
I took no courses, but what I did was I read the books. I worked with some very good editors.
Yes.
And then I started, once I understood some things that I needed to learn how to do, I then took out my favorite authors, not for the purpose of reading their books, but I would pick up a chapter and say, okay, what's the inner dialogue that the author is creating in me? Because what I didn't realize was the best books are not the author monologue. It's an author dialogue with what's going on in your head. It's the same thing when you're public speaking. You want to engage your audience. I want to get my readers and the people listening thinking about, how does this tie to my life? Or what's going to happen next? Or why did this character say this? Or and I want to get you angry. Like I need to get, as the reader, the great authors are able to invoke your emotions. You're not just reading a story. Right. You're reading a story and you're saying, why did she do that? How could she do something so stupid at this point? This is what I would have done. Yes. And the great writers get you thinking that. But until you understand that these are, you can call them tricks, but these are skills that great writers have. Until you understand what those are and how to do it yourself,
right?
You haven't written anything worthwhile.
Well, I visited your YouTube channel, and you have some great YouTubes teaching, talking about emotion. And I like you talked about Uncle Harry. I liked Uncle Harry and his advice.
He's my favorite character. And he's real.
Yes.
He's not invented.
But can you give us a shorter version of Uncle Harry?
I can tell you the Uncle Harry story really quickly.
Oh, good, because it's a great story.
So my Uncle Harry was a famous Montreal pediatrician. Mm-hmm. And when he was dying of cancer, I was all of 19. So he was in his 70s already. He also happened to be my pediatrician. And so I went to visit him. It was just a hospital visit. And he pulled me aside and he said, Norm, he said, you're just starting on your life. He said, and I have two pieces of advice for you. Take it or leave it. He said, but one, he said, your career is like a river, is going to be like a river, and you've got a choice. He said, when you get in the river in your boat, you can either fight the current because you see something on the other shore that you need to get to. Mm-hmm. He said, and that will be a lot of energy to cross to. He said, and that's your choice. He said, or you can do what I did. He said, I desperately wanted to be an obstetrician when I graduated med school, but there were no openings. And I took the opening in pediatrics when it came up. He said, I could have fought the current and held out, but I decided to become a pediatrician and I never looked back. He said, so you can follow the current of that river and the river is going to twist and turn. He said, and if you just reach out for the opportunities that come along on that ride, you'll find that your career has taken you to places you could never possibly have imagined. And that's what he told me. And at the time I was in pre-med. Mm-hmm. And about 2 weeks later, I was standing in a lab, looking down a microscope, trying to find a fungus. And I'd been doing this for years, so I wasn't bad at it.
Right.
But it was first year university, and I'm looking at, I can't find this fungus. And I'm moving it around. I finally, like a minute later, it felt like 10 years later, but a minute later, because there was this lineup behind me, I found the fungus. And I looked down and I said, Norm, what are you doing? You don't want to be a doctor. I closed up my book, put my knapsack over my shoulder, headed straight for my course advisor's office. And I said, get me out of this. And she said, well, what are you interested in? So I said, I don't know. She said, well, what courses have you taken in the past that you liked? I said, well, I did a little bit of law in high school. She said, well, why don't you take a course in law? Mm-hmm. And I took that course. And again, here I am on Uncle Harry's River. I still don't realize it. I took a course in law at university, undergrad. loved it. And the next year I got into the faculty at McGill and never looked back. And then my first day of second year, I took a tax course and I knew I was in heaven. Okay, I was a bit geeky because most law students can't stand tax, but I knew I'd found my calling quite by accident. But there was Uncle Harry's advice, bang, and I lived it my entire career. And the other thing he said is, when opportunities come by, don't say no.
Oh.
Just stay open to the opportunities, take them. What's the worst that's going to happen? It won't work out. And by following those two simple rules, and I write about them in Breakdown, I write about them in Take Charge because they're so fundamentally important. They were so fundamentally important to my life and my development that I tell people, like, don't try and map out your whole life. And even for those starting over, like, I didn't know I was going to become an author. I had no idea, but I started writing. And it's funny because I still remember I was on vacation with my wife in my mid 40s. I was at that point already running the firm. And I took with me, I was reading The English Patient, Michael Ondaatje's book, which had won some kind of prize or other. And I turned to her at about page 120, and I said, Sharon, the one thing I can tell you for sure is I'm never writing a book. because I don't possess this kind of talent. I know for sure. I can tell you for sure I am never writing a book. Well, guess what?
But your books they're very unique to you. I mean, you may not write that book, but you can write a book.
I can write a book. I can write a mean fiction now too. The reviews on my books have been excellent. And why? I think because whether it's my fiction or my nonfiction, I understand you need to tie into your viewer. You need to tie into your audience. You need to connect with their emotions, and you need to understand how they feel about things.
Right.
And if you can do that and capture that, they'll read you.
Yeah.
Or they'll listen to you.
So we talk about three things. Now, you've already mentioned this one. The challenge, you just go ahead. If the challenge is presented, you just go ahead. You do it. Even though you're shaking in your shoes, you just buckle up and go for it. But there's something that happens before that even keeps us sometimes from doing that, and that is?
Oh, really simple. It's another four-letter word. It's not words you can't pronounce, but it's fear.
Yes.
Fear. It's the fear that's constantly holding you back. And this is the one thing I wanted to point out, that I had many years where I was extraordinarily successful at what I did. But there wasn't a day or a week that went by that there wasn't this little voice telling me, Norm, this could all fall apart tomorrow. Or, Norm, are you sure you can do this? Or are you sure you're going to succeed? Or I'd take an initiative and I'd have to make a decision. When you're the leader, the buck stops with you. You got to make the decisions. Yeah. If it's a good decision, then it's everybody's decision. If it's a bad decision, you wear it. Yes. And as leader that if you're a good leader, 1 out of every 4 decisions you make are going to be wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're not pushing hard. You're not pushing your organization hard enough.
Right.
If all your decisions are right, it means you're missing all kinds of opportunities. The other thing is, and this I learned from a famous NFL coach, Bill Walsh, who won the Super Bowl with the 49ers. He inherited a completely loser team. His great life philosophy was always, what did I learn from this?
Yeah.
And you don't learn much from your success, but
Never.
you learn a ton from your failures. Because apart from anything else you learn, you can pick yourself up, you can keep going. And the most important thing you learn, because what's the real thing we fear? We fear everybody else going to look at us and laugh. Aha, look at that, Norm failed. And the reality is everybody's feeling the same way. We're all afraid.
But leaders have a tendency of being driven by this non-failure. I can't fail. I won't fail.
But they do.
But they do. So it's like crushing.
Look at Lee Iacocca, who built Chrysler. I mean, he got fired from Ford. Did a terrible job there. But, what did he learn through all that he then applied to his next series of successes?
Right.
I mean, look at Joe Biden. He was never going to be the president.
Yeah.
So, you don't know, but B, if you don't put yourself in a position to try, you're not even out of the starting gate. And, most people who appear to be extraordinarily successful are just really good at sloughing off the field. It's all what Bill Walsh said. What did I learn from this? What can I do tomorrow a little bit differently based on what I learned today? And if you can do that and recognize, like, we're all there, that we all have this little voice in the back of our head saying, I don't think you can do this. Or the well-meaning friend saying, really? You're going to try that? You know who they are, and those are people you don't really need in your life. What you want are the people who are willing to say, wow, you're trying that. I'm so impressed that you're even trying. I mean, those are the people we want to surround ourselves with.
Well, thanks for being so transparent. I mean, that's so valuable for so many of my women that are out there. There are a few men as well that listen, but we get so caught up in perhaps being the victim, where we need to change that thinking to being the woman in charge of their life, and realizing that nobody comes in totally a complete package.
No kidding.
It's all about transition, and just taking those risks.
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, you can do it. The other thing I live my life by, and certainly did while I was leading, and I'm more conscious of it since, is, if I can affect one person's life to the positive, that's success. That's my definition of success. It's not about what I've done, but if I can say something or do something or lead you in a direction to improve your life, even if I don't know about it, and especially if I don't know about it, then I've succeeded. And that's how I measure success, not necessarily by how well I'm doing, but how am I giving back for all the people who did that for me and had no idea that they helped make me the me I am.
Yeah.
I want to be able to say things to people, whether I meet them or not, where they go away, they think about it, and they begin to change their life, however much, for the positive, and where they say, well, you know what, I'm really glad I read Norm's book, or that I listened to his podcast, or something that he said has motivated me to change my life, and I think I'm in a better place now. Like, I don't even need to know about it.
Was this part of your lesson learned through your transitions? Or
Absolutely.
were you always, was this always a belief of yours?
It was a belief of mine since I was a young lawyer, that, and I remembered the people who didn't, like Donald Sutherland, and I had a few other examples, who didn't have any reason or objective need to be helping me, but they would, they'd say something at the appropriate time, or they'd give me a lesson and not even realize. I called, and this is a final anecdote, I had dinner with a family friend. It was a business event in my second year as a lawyer. And he gave me a piece of advice. He didn't, I don't know that he realized, he gave me another piece of advice that I led my life by, and I put it into Take Charge.
Yeah.
And as I was getting ready to publish the book, I picked up the phone, I called him. He at this point, he's 88 years old. And I said, Harvey, I just needed you to know that you're in my book, and I'm going to send you a complimentary copy of it. And I wanted to thank you for the advice you gave me. He said, Norm, what are you talking about? And I said,
what advice?
Yeah, exactly. And I said, here, you told me something. And, when I was in my second year, and at every crossroad, I asked myself, what would Harvey do in this situation? And I governed myself by that. And like, you were 100% right. It's like, I followed your advice at every opportunity, and it completely worked for me.
What was the advice? Did I miss it?
I haven't given it yet. Yeah.
Oh, good. I
I won't say you have. I won't say you have to read my book to get it. But what he said was, he said, you're going to face a lot of moments where you're asking yourself, am I at the right place? Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Should I be making a move now? Or someone will call you with something that looks much more lucrative than what you have. Mm-hmm. He said, I'm not going to give you advice. I'm just going to tell you what I did. He said, I stayed put at my firm while all my friends were always looking for something better, and they'd checkerboard back and forth. He said, and when I compare myself where I am today, and at that point in time, he was in his 50s, mm-hmm. To where they are, he said, I'm miles ahead of them. He said, and I've seen way more opportunities not moving and not trying to, it kind of tied in with Uncle Harry. The opportunities mm-hmm. found him. He was doing something he liked.
Yes.
There always might have been something better. He didn't go chasing after it. He said, that's worked for me. And at every moment where I thought maybe I should leave Heenan Blakey, maybe there's something better out there and nobody's paying attention to me this week, I'm feeling hurt. And I always fell back, you know what, I'm just going to stay the course. And by staying the course, I had this unbelievably indescribable career for 35 years.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you do when you found yourself in situations that maybe things weren't going well? Did you have a spot that you went? Did you do something that calmed your spirits, gave you inner support, anything like that you?
Well, I'm a natural meditator.
Okay, that's a big one.
My sister does it for a living, but I can't do it when I try to do it. It's only when I don't try to do it that I can do it.
Right.
And I find my greatest solutions come when I'm not thinking about them. So I will obsess over a problem to a point, where I discover, okay, obsessing over this isn't getting me anywhere. And then I let it go, I do something else, and the answer comes to me. Now, it doesn't mean the answer is right. But what I'm going to do. And once I make a decision, what I'm going to do, very often I'll talk to people. I'll say, here's what I'm planning. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think about it? And then I go. And once I make the decision to go, I don't second guess myself. Mm-hmm. And I guess when you look at great leaders, they have to have the ability, once they've made a decision, I'll live with it. And there are two, the final point I'll make is if you're going to be a great leader, there are two words you need to master. And they're, I'm sorry.
Oh, I love that. I saw that.
I'm sorry. I was wrong. You know what? I was wrong. And, some people are disarmed by it, but the more defensive you get, the more upset everyone around you get, because if you're the leader, you have to be able to say, I own the mistake.
Yes.
What can we learn from it? Let's move on. But yes, right. I own this. And if you can do that, people will follow you anywhere because apart from anything else, that's how you build trust.
Yeah. Might save a marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's probably marriage counselors say that. I'm sorry works. And not always.
It does.
Not always.
All of it. No, not all of it. It takes a little bit more.
Sometimes it's I'm sorry in 3 or 4 days, but
yes. Yes.
But you have to acknowledge. If you can't acknowledge, you can't move on.
Now, we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I want them to know how they can find you. Now, you have 4 books, is that correct?
I have 4 books. The easiest way to find me, rather than list them all off.
Yes.
Just go to my website. Norman Bacall. The hardest part about my website is spelling it right. So it's Norman Bacall, and Norman like Norman, Bacall, Bacal, .com. Simple as that.
Yeah.
You'll go there. You can find out all about me. You can join my mailing list. If you want to get in touch with me directly, you can send me an email through there. I will tell you, I guarantee I respond to everyone, because if I can help anybody, anywhere, I always feel like I'm the one who's gained. So like, don't hesitate. Don't think it's too much. Don't think I'm too important. I don't believe that.
Right. Now, you've done a lot of blogging on LinkedIn, but are those blogs also on your website?
I'm a little bit lazy about adding them to my website, but yeah, most of my blogs are on LinkedIn. Yeah. And I've got a put more of them on my website. If you're not on LinkedIn, but I also send out a newsletter now. So if you join my newsletter, you'll get a lot of what I publish on LinkedIn sent directly to your mailbox. And it's just things to think about, things to be inspired by, life lessons. I do all kinds of stuff. I have one for my fiction readers, one for my nonfiction readers. And really, my job is, I feel, is to challenge you and help make you be a little bit better as you. And that makes me a little better as me.
We sign up for the newsletter on your website.
Yeah, right on my webpage, normabacall.com. You can get there. And if you want to look around and check out the books and get a better sense, all my podcasts are there as well. Including my YouTube channel, you can get it through the web. Like, everything's connected to the website.
I love the YouTube. I went there to see you'd speak about storytelling, and a lot of information, different things. So
yeah, I have fun. I love to talk, and I'm fond of saying I will talk to anybody about anything, anytime. And hopefully I'll learn as much as I'll teach.
Yes. Well, I always like to close with a few questions, if I may. One and it's to help people go through this journey, but would you share any pitfall to avoid on their journey? My listeners, to avoid on their journey.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting flash question, and we didn't prepare for it. But
it's the fun of it.
but I think the key thing is get out of your way.
No, I like that.
Just get out of your own way. I mean, most of the reasons why we say, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow," or "I'll think about it," hesitancy is generally, "I'll think about it," is usually code for no. Mm-hmm. And often it's code for no because I don't think I can do it.
Yeah.
So get out of your way, just try it. I mean, if it doesn't interest you, fine. I get it. Like, there's, I can't paint to save my life. I'm not, my wife is the artist in the family. She's, she does portraits and still lifes, and she's got great talent. I can't, I have zero talent. Even my stick people are ugly, but so I know that about me, but not for lack of trying. I just don't have any talent. But the other thing is, you don't have to have the talent of the most famous authors of the world to write.
No.
You just need like me, you just need a pen and a piece of paper to start. It's funny because I'm starting a course through our local community organization in the fall called So You Want to Write Your Memoirs. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be a small group of us getting together and talking about our stories. And it's not far from talking about your stories to actually writing them down. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have to write like a John Grisham to write a story.
Yeah. Yes. The other question I like to ask is, what was your greatest success? Now, you've had a lot of successes that you've shared those with us very openly today and honestly. But out of all of those magnificent successes, what is the one you value the most? Oh,
that's an easy one. 4 independent children, all married, 6 grandchildren, the greatest joys of my life, and what we did with them. And that's, again, a function of my wife, who said to me early on, "You're going to be home for dinner every night." She said, "Unless you're out of town, I don't care how hard you're working. I don't care if you put in a 20-hour day. 6:30 to 8 o'clock, we own you." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Because every hour you put in with our children while they're growing up is 1 hour they won't spend in therapy later."
Oh, I like that. That's so true.
And and she also is fond of saying, "You reap what you sow." So, what was my biggest investment? I found.
Oh, indeed. We can make mega money, and still it all just comes down to the basics of love, connection, support. That's really what we value in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Norm, this has been fabulous. I've enjoyed every minute. I love your tales. I love your stories. I love Uncle Henry. Harry, sorry, just changed his name. Uncle Harry. I just like, and I really encourage my listeners to go to your different sites just to experience more of you. So thank you so much for sharing your second wind with us.
Oh, and thank you, Joyce. It's really been my honor. Thank you.
Yeah. So listeners out there, you have heard some really words of wisdom that I always like for you to walk away with. The important thing this week is that wisdom is only with you, and you have a great opportunity to share it. There are lots of people out there that need words of encouragement, some way to move forward in their life, make sense of their life. And I encourage you strongly, reach out to your soul sister, to your brother, to your mother, whoever is needing your support today. And always remember that we are here every week for you to get more words of wisdom and share with the rest of the world. I thank you for being here today, and I indeed want you to be here next week. Thank you for coming back.
Joyce Buford returns next week at the same time for another edition of Second Wind. Through the Joyce Buford Empowerment System, women are receiving the support they need through their transitions and are able to reclaim their true purpose with confidence. They receive the tools they need to map out new lives. You can find out more about her coaching services at joycebufordempowers.com.